Welcome to the latest Watercolors Aquarium Gallery podcast brought to you from the Aquarium Rush Studios in Grand Rapids, Michigan. My name is Ben.
I'm Amy.
And I'm Charles.
Today we are talking about what hopefully will be a somewhat controversial topic, and we have a special guest speaker, Dr. Alisha Davidson from the University of Tasmania with a degree in... All right, I knew I was going to get it wrong. Hi, Alisha.
Hi,
Hey guys, how's it going?
Okay, describe your degree again, please.
So my degree was looking at actually risk assessment for invasive species and how do you make decisions when you don't have all of the information.
Oh, I like it.
Wow.
Can I already start grilling her? I'm already intrigued.
I love, uncertainty.
So when we talk about this in context of the aquarium hobby, one of the things that kind of triggered the discussion for me was about a year ago, the marbled crayfish got put on the prohibited Michigan list. And this is a crayfish that I've kept many times, reproduced many times.
They're super easy to breed. A lot of hobbyists who have a fish room have a tank just kind of going with them.
Yeah. And I remember when it got put on the prohibited species, and by the way, it's one of those that got put on the prohibited species with no known record of it found anywhere in a body of water in Michigan. It was put on the prohibited species because of the risk of introduction, because in other ecosystems it has been introduced and caused havoc in ecosystems similar to ecosystems that we have here, and the outrage from certain members of the aquarium hobby.
Is outrage even like is it whining? Is that a better way?
That's way better. That's way more accurate.
That could easily be the description that could be used. But to explain to somebody why it matters, that's kind of what the core we're going to get into today. And then also, what's around, what's at risk? That's why we brought Dr. Davidson here to talk to us.
All right. Well, I didn't realize you were going to bring up the marbled crayfish. That's not only on the Michigan list. It's actually so the Great Lakes is difficult to manage when it comes to invasive species because there are 10 jurisdictions, 8 states, 2 Canadian provinces. We all have to agree what gets managed. Because if something comes into like Michigan on the Ontario side, or not Ontario side, that would be Huron, but you get the gist. If something comes over in Erie and then it gets moved by a boat, it's a weakest linked issue. So whatever state or jurisdiction doesn't regulate a species, it comes in there and then travels to all the other ones that have the regulations. And so the governors came together and started a list of, it's called the least wanted list. And so there's a bunch of ones that you'd recognize on there. I believe there's currently 21 fish and plants and invertebrates. And they've all 10 jurisdictions have agreed on those species. And so most of them are regulated by all 10, but not all of them. New Zealand mud snail is another one that's on there. That's kind of a recent one. Marbled crayfish is kind of a recent one as well. So crayfish are, they're particularly destructive. Their impacts. They eat everything. They love fish eggs. A lot of Lake Michigan species, I think you can correct me later, Charles. You're the one. A lot of really vulnerable species, I'll say, are, they love to lay their eggs in rock crevices. Mm-hmm. And they've just been totally hit hard by introduced crayfish who eat all the fish eggs, also eat our native crayfish. So, there's been a lot of restoration projects that have tried to reproduce these rock piles while also trapping heavily for invasive crayfish. So,
yeah, so I'm going to address a question I already know people are going to be listening and asking, well, if we've already curbed the marbled crayfish, why do we have invasive ones? Well, there's this thing called a rusty crayfish, and that's the one I'm familiar with because, so I've mentioned I calibrated homemade respirometers with crayfish. They were provided to me by a professor who was working with rusty crayfish. And I remember that was when it hit my radar because I was like, so what am I supposed to do with these when I'm done? And he goes, oh, just destroy them. Like, he's like, legally, you can't keep them. And I'm like, oh. And that's when I was like, that was a few years into getting my undergrad. And I was that was my first experience with like, oh, this is really serious. Like,
yeah, you like can't, transportation of all these are prohibited. So the red swamp crayfish is another one that's been more recently, very aggressive. So yeah, like my parents live on a lake up north, and we were taking the dock out a couple weeks ago, and there were a couple of really tiny zebra mussels on the bottom. And they've already known, like the Lake Association has already known this. Luckily, the calcium levels are so low that zebras will just never do well.
Wow.
There's a subset of lakes where the calcium levels are just low enough where they can't really make their shells well enough. And so I was like, oh, this is so cool though, because they're alive, and I could like maybe put them in a little jar and take them home like for the kids like to take to school or something. And I'm like, no, that's illegal. Like driving my car with them. So I'm like, you just, I mean.
that is the exact wrong reaction.
Right. I mean, you're obviously, these things are never going to get released.
That's how they spread, Alicia.
But no, I mean, so I printed out a couple of like established species that have been introduced by the aquaria trade. And one of them, the banded mystery snail, was first introduced by a conchologist who loved them so much that he released this is what
someone who should have known
who
better,
released
right?
200. Well, and you guys have probably heard of kudzu down south. They like, you see a barn, but it's actually like a kudzu cover, like it just covers everything.
Oh.
Like you can't even imagine. It's a vine. It's a terrestrial plant. And introduced by like researchers. There's been a lot of invasive species that have been introduced by who like they now know better, but back in the early 1900s.
But is a conchologist the name for somebody who studies like
apparently this was
gastropods or something?
Yeah. So we'll get to GLANSIS.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Seriously. But the other thing, your point of like, why are we prohibiting these when they're not here? And, that is definitely their best time to
That's like, if they're already here, it's already too late.
Basically. I mean, there's prevention, which is like the most cost effective, best way to do things. And that's the watch list species that you're talking about. That's when you prohibit something that's not here yet. And then there's what's called early detection and rapid response. So there's a couple of plant species. I think the red swamp crayfish. You find one or two and it's like, bam, we know these are bad ones. We're bringing down the hammer. Like you really focus on this one water body and you can eradicate them. Once they spread to, connected water bodies or a larger lake or river, it's very, very difficult to eradicate them. So it's really prevention or that early detection, rapid response that you need to focus on the species. So best to get them early.
Okay, I got to go back to the mystery snail.
Okay.
What do you know the genus and species on that?
Viviparus georgianus.
Okay, so that's not the mystery snail we're used to seeing.
Which is Pomacea bridgei.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't think that doesn't ring a bell.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I think mystery snails are applied to a few different groups of snails, but that's not the one that we're selling actively right now in the store.
No. This would be, so these are actually so this list, there's 22 of them. They're all established. These are not the watch list species because.
So those are established in Michigan already.
Wow.
Or the Great. So
in the Great
this
Lakes.
Database that I pulled from, I might as well talk about this now. So it's called GLANSIS, Great Lakes Aquatic Non-Indigenous Species Information System.
What? No.
Should I repeat it? No. So it's been around for a long time before I moved back to the Great Lakes to start working here. And what it basically does, it keeps ticking up, right? There's like 182 or 183 established species now in the Great Lakes that are non-indigenous. And if you want even some more fun of like terminology, so there's invasive, native, non-native, indigenous, non-indigenous, nuisance. There's all of these words for something. And, you have what we use is non-indigenous because that just means basically not native. It doesn't imply any sort of impact or negative harm. I mean, a lot of these do cause that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But so in this GLANSIS, we call it non-indigenous. And that's kind of my favorite term because it's very neutral and objective.
You're not going to piss anybody off with that term.
Well, I mean,
I'm sure you're going to
Watch
piss
me.
somebody off.
There's always a way to piss somebody off. But like a house finch versus a purple finch, right?
Okay.
A house finch is at least according to my 1987 edition of Roger Troy Peterson's Field Guide to Birds, a house finch is a non-native, but it's not considered. They don't think it's causing any problems. People confuse it with
Really?
purple finches all the time.
okay.
But allegedly, according to, like I said, I think it is 1987 might be the actual date that my version was written. So I haven't even looked it up since then. As opposed to like a European sparrow, which non-native, non-indigenous, and a nuisance, and causes all kinds of problems.
Right.
Right?
So yeah, I mean, a lot of these species that are here, they're just hanging out. They're low numbers. They never grow exponentially. They never cause any impacts. So, obviously we don't really want them in the ecosystem, but they're not really causing any problems. So that way with non-indigenous, you can just capture everything. And then you start classifying impacts. And so what this GLANSIS does, it's got the non-indigenous, or what's called a range expander, something that was, say in Ontario, it wouldn't have naturally gotten to like Michigan by itself because of waterfalls. And so those are called things that have been moved anthropogenically by people.
Right?
Good term.
That's
Good
a
term.
great
Called
That means
the
by
range
people, by the
expanders.
way.
Yeah, by people. And then you have the watch list species, which is kind of that's been more my focus the last few years. Those are the ones that aren't here yet. We're watching them. It's a list. So hence watch list. And and then you can look at, what Great Lakes Basin they're in, what pathway they arrived by. Pathway is, so it's a similar term, or a term is vector, and that's basically how something is moved. Aquaria being one of those pathways.
In other words, we did it.
Right. I mean, in GLANSIS, you have they have 6 different ones that are kind of grouped. One of them is intentional release or escape from recreational culture. And so, intentional release. So I was driving here, you pass the gas station and you see live bait sold here. So bait is a huge one. So Aquaria is grouped under this, but so is bait.
That's how rusty crayfish actually got into the Great Lakes.
Yeah, I mean a lot of them did. They're doing eDNA studies and they're constantly finding non-native species in bait
eDNA
pools.
is environmental DNA, by the way, for everyone else at the table.
So it's like
Thanks for that.
the poop, the skin, the molting, like everything. It comes off in the water, and so they can run tests to look at, well, what's been here or what's probably in here. It's not 100%, but it's a really good way when you're looking for something really hard to see or really small. The same way that you would figure out like what sort of virus or bacteria is, in your body, they're developing that, which is another really great way to monitor. So you have these lists of watch lists and you're like, well, there's a million places to hide for these species. How do we look for them all? You don't have a ton of money.
Right.
Well, so you can take a sample of water and say, well, these are the DNA stretches. Okay, I'm not an expert in this, obviously, but these are these are the DNA that we know from these 21 species. Let's see if we have a match. Okay, and if you get a match, then you can say, okay, well, we think this is probably here. We need to look closer and focus. And so that's one of the ways that we're improving in detecting these species.
That's insane technology. To
Yeah.
just take a
I mean,
sample
it's-
of water and be like, hey, is there a tiny particle of something's poop in it? What is it?
Right. And so obviously, I mean, it's, it's extremely hard to, one of the challenges, so there's a lot of these congeneric species. So a congener is something that's in the same genus. So you can have a native one and a non-native one. I think you've talked about that.
Nigeria densa and Nigeria canadiensis.
Yeah, and so it's really hard to separate those two.
Right.
So there's a lot of challenges to eDNA. It can be very costly, but it's in development. So
It's definitely less costly than doing like a grid search of every lake in Michigan, though.
right, I mean, yeah, that's just never, in our wildest dreams would you have the funding for that. So. Where was I? I don't know. I was talking about GLANSIS, and you've got all these. So you have bait, you've got the live trades. So you have the intentional release. Okay, the guppy or the goldfish gets too big for the tank, and whoops, we don't want to kill it. Let's let go. So another group. Speaking of how to dispose of unwanted aquarium. Do you guys know Habitattitude? Habitattitude? It's
Habitattitude.
Habitattitude. Extremely
Yeah.
hard to say.
What is it?
I've seen that
You know,
on
Habitattitude.
printed on like fish bags,
Yeah.
but I've never actually looked into what it is.
So their thing is how to humanely deal with unwanted aquarium species. You should look it up. It's
Bring them here.
There is not much that we won't take or
We
we
love-
don't have room for.
Island
If we
of-
do-
I was like, and if you are incapable of destroying it yourself and are legally required to, I am more than capable of doing that for you.
yeah, I get that too.
Yeah.
Your island of misfit toys, you know, like this is the aquarium
Oh my
with like the return fish.
We'll have to show you Lumpy downstairs.
Oh, poor Lumpy.
He's
Yeah.
raised up in a 30-gallon tank and then surrendered.
And he's this big.
He's that big. Well, I mean, if you stretched him out because his spine is so bent that you can't
Oh, no.
exactly see how long he is. So,
That's why we have discussions like this.
yeah.
Yeah.
To talk about Lumpy.
well,
Yeah.
to talk about why we, as aquarists, we need care, right? And,
Yeah.
and the life of an organism matters.
Yeah.
And we have to pay attention to that.
Right.
And
You want to
the
be.
effect that organism is going to have on us and on the rest of the world matters.
Yeah. I just
Yeah.
had that conversation today with somebody who had a blackmore, and I think it was like a 3-gallon tank, which blackmore is
Right.
a species of goldfish. And she's like, oh, how big is it going to get? And we told her, and actually, Charles had this interaction, and she was actually like, oh, wow, cool, he's going to get that big. That's not usually the response we get.
Right.
But I was talking to her a little bit afterwards, and she's like, so what do people do? Like, what do people do if they can't or won't get a bigger tank? And I'm like, well, some people try and flush them, and some people decide, well, they'll just take their chances outside. She's like, really? People will do that? Wouldn't it die? I'm like, if we're lucky, like, if we're lucky, it dies instead of going into our ecosystems and destroying it. Otherwise, they can bring it here, and we'll find a happy home. Or if it really comes to it, we can take care of that organism.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, and I need to verify this, but I believe all of you out there listening, this is important information. If you release an organism into the environment, and maybe you know this, it's a $2,500 fine
Yes.
per individual,
Wow.
unless you do it knowing that it's illegal. And oh, by the way, everybody listening, you all know this is illegal.
Haha.
Then it's a $5,000 fine per organism if you release it into the wild. So it's $2,500, even if you don't think you're doing something wrong.
Not worth it.
Nope.
Right. So is that with it? I'm curious. Is that all any species? Because
If
so
it's on
I
the
am.
prohibited list, quote unquote.
No, I think that is if you
Okay.
release a non-native species, if you intentionally release, if you take your goldfish down to a stream and go, be free,
Right.
boom, $2,500 fine. Releasing a non-native species into an ecosystem, boom. And oh, by the way, if you have a pond and it's connected to a stream and it rains really hard and floods and all your koi get out and go swimming down the Rogue River, $2,500 per koi.
Yeah.
Because that counts as releasing them, even if it wasn't intentional.
Right. So that's that escape. Yeah.
Yeah.
Floods and
Yeah.
then out
Right.
it goes. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the consequences of, that's how big of a deal this is. So we digressed a little bit there. Keep talking about,
Why don't you
I
read that
sidetracked.
list
talking
of your watch list? I would
Yeah.
like to hear that.
watch lists.
What's that? Talk about the watch list?
We like
Yeah.
watch lists. We like to, because what that does
Okay.
is it gives it something tangible to us to say, oh, here's something we need to pay extra attention to.
Yeah, we just learned one today that we have ordered from one of our wholesalers, not for a long time, but readily,
Yeah.
that is now on a list like that. So
And so it's a list that it's not prohibited, but we got to pay special attention to it, which means, to me, that means we shouldn't have it.
right.
Yeah, I mean, so these watch lists, there's for most of them, it's not like there's no policy or law on these.
Right.
It's purely a voluntary thing, which is often why it's so challenging. I know you want me to come in guns blazing on the aquarium industry, but actually, my question is my first sort of question for you guys. So, I took a tour here before we came in, and it's incredible. Like, what all the things that you're doing. You're a retailer, but you're also like, you're developing these new biomes and breeding and doing all these amazing things. And you're like very conscious of being like environmentally responsible. What do you guys think would be like the percentage of Aquarius stores that are like you guys?
I haven't been
It seems
to
very
one.
unique. Like I feel like, like there's a couple goldfish in the window, like what you see is what you get. But
This store exists because the three of us wish a store like this existed when we were younger.
So I would say Proust Pets in Lansing
That's a good one.
does some things along these lines.
okay.
And so I think the way that I answer that question is like this. How many stores are there out there that are just like watercolors? 0.
Right. Because
How many stores are there out there that are just like Proust Pets in Lansing? 0. Right? But how many stores are there out there that are trying really hard to take the extra step to do things right, to improve the hobby, to make significant contributions not only to the bottom line, but also to the hobby as a whole? And 5%, 10%,
right.
0 big box stores that I'm aware of. I should throw that disclaimer. I know of no such situation with a big box store.
I don't think it's possible, like in the scale that they're doing it, in the ways that they source their fish.
I think the second part of the disclaimer is right. In the scale that they're doing it, they have more resources to make it possible than we do. So to do things right, big box stores have more resources. They should be able to do it much, much better.
Yeah, they should be. I think there's a lot of like smaller stores out there who are doing pieces of it, who are just waiting to be asked to do more. You know, that it's people want the easy way a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I asked that because, it's challenging for retail stores, so the whole organisms in trade, which is, what you guys
That's
do.
what we do.
There are multiple names for common species. There's confusion over the Latin names. They are being revised.
Yeah.
These lists they can be hard to find, hard to interpret. Some of these species have what we predict to be very low impacts. And we understand, people who do the regulation, they understand that there's a lot of joy and livelihoods to be made from aquaria. And, they don't want to, they want people to sell what is safe. And so, it can be hard to know that because these impacts are unknown. There hasn't been research into, okay, well, what does that snail do? No one really knows. And so how is the retailer supposed to know? There's hitchhikers. There's this interesting, it's actually very Halloween looking. It's like a ghost parasite that came in, on goldfish is what they think. As a parasite, because it's native. So both the goldfish and this parasite, which is called the Japanese fish louse, Argulus japonicus. It looks actually like the underside of a ray, almost looks like it has like this face with this little tiny mouth, like a white thing.
This is going to seem like a silly question, but is that different than just the typical fish louse?
Well, so that's the other thing is like, taxonomists have a hard time identifying these species. You guys can't be expected to like be able to identify a lot of these things down. And so, I can't say for sure. Maybe it doesn't sound extremely widespread, but a lot of these things, they like once you start looking, you start finding them everywhere. You don't know about them until all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, this is that. Okay, that is that, and that is that too.
Maybe
and
that's why we have such a hard time with finding good quality goldfish.
Right. I mean, things come on in plants, things come on in fish, and then that gets released. And so there's these sort of, unintentional species that even if the species it comes on is fine, then the other things that could be on it are not. So it's hard.
Yeah.
So I can appreciate that.
One of the points I think that we try to make here is if you don't know enough about it, you shouldn't sell it.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, GLANSIS, if you don't know, you can plug it in and you can see if it's been reviewed or assessed. So my PhD was focused on So that decision making under uncertainty. So when I first got there, I did it in Australia. My advisor was doing a sort of risk assessment for hull fouling, things that come over on big ships across oceans. That's like how we got zebra mussels. So a big deal. Interestingly, another side note, since ballast water management, ballast water is that water that the big ships put on and off, and that's where all that stuff came to be. Because of improved technology and management, that pathway is much less than it used to be, and the organisms in trade is kind of like the hot one these days in the invasive species world. So, you guys are on the hot seat. But so where
we need to be okay with that, though.
Right. I mean, it's, there's plenty of safe alternatives. And so anyway, so this risk assessment I was doing in Australia, there were like hundreds of species that could come over, and I was charged with finding the impact data. Okay, what are these things going to do? And I'm like looking, and I'm like, Chad, I can't find anything on any of these things. And so like, what do you do? Do you assume it will have an impact? And there's therefore sort of regulate it and not sell it or not allow it in? Or do you assume it doesn't have an impact and,
just wait and see what happens.
Wait and see. And so it's funny. So, Europe, so the thing where you sort of assume the worst until you can be, have more evidence, that's sort of a precautionary approach. That's what you see Europe, Australia, New Zealand doing. The not precautionary approach is, more American because let's just see. Yeah. No surprise there. So,
welcome to the United States.
And so that's kind of where my whole thing with, how do you make decisions when you don't have all the impact data? But GLANSIS has done a really good job in trying to find, okay, well, let's see, what has it done in other countries? That's a good thing to know. And I would obviously advocate the precautionary approach, but again, it's, you have industry lobby, Aquarius, the pet trade. Like in Florida, I think there's like 9 species of boa constrictors are trying to prohibit, and like the one that they weren't able to is like the one they sell in pet stores because of all the money behind it. So it's,
Poor Florida.
Yeah.
So this would be a much different discussion down in Florida. And actually, I shouldn't say that so like offhandedly. It's genuinely speaking, it would be a much different conversation in Florida because the amount of species that we keep and sell regularly here that if half the aquariums, not that we would ever do this, don't worry, but if we dumped them into 10 different bodies in the Great Lakes, not a single one of those species would survive.
Right.
Down in Florida, it's a whole different story.
There are over 40 species of commonly available aquarium fish that are established in Florida that I am aware of personally.
Oh, yeah.
Easily.
Yeah.
Easily.
But I was going to say, interestingly, that's even changing in the Great Lakes. So do you guys know water hyacinth?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So for so long, it's been, okay, no big deal. Winter will kill it. But climate's changing. Winters are milder.
Right.
And there has been more evidence that there are overwintering populations down near Detroit and Detroit River where it just doesn't quite get cold enough. And things are adapting. Like Jurassic Park.
Right, nature will find a way.
It will find a way.
Yeah.
So it's, these things that their distribution ranges are just creeping a little farther north. So
A little too close for comfort.
So many of those things there's a substitution for. We were just talking about Cabamba carolinia.
Yeah.
Right?
Which is a beautiful, fluffy aquarium plant that is really like when we had been able to get a species in or via trade-in or whatever, they would go right away.
Oh, yeah.
We don't carry that plant anymore, obviously.
Right. But we have Asian embulia.
And I want to comment on that. When I first started working here, I was not aware that, like I'd been kind of out of the hobby for a while. I was not aware that Cabamba was now prohibited. And I walked in and I was like, oh, look, Cabamba. And everyone's like, Charles, that's embulia. Do not ever say that.
Don't call it Cabamba. It is not.
Right.
I was like, oh, sorry.
There's alternatives for all of these things. And the freshwater ecosystems, the tropical freshwater ecosystems, contain so many more species that we just don't even know about than just about any other ecosystem out there. The diversity is outrageous. So if there's something we can't keep, there's something else that's going to be just fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just seems so unreasonable to complain about the few things that impact our like home
Right.
directly.
Oh,
Yep, we can't figure out. We don't have a substitution for a self-cloning crayfish.
No.
Okay, so we'll figure something else out.
So
But-
just, try a little harder and breed a different one.
exactly.
well, a recent conversation I had was like, a guy had been out for a while, and he's like, "Do you guys get dojo loaches still?" And I was like, "No, but we have coolie loaches."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, those are cool."
What do you know about dojo loaches? Weather loaches.
So yeah, that's the Oriental weatherfish.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's,
Misgurnus aquilocadatus.
that's what I thought.
So
you were
I
gonna say.
actually printed out
Oh,
Oh,
one.
cool.
she's got
So this is what fact sheet looks like from GLANSIS. You can see the
Cool.
nice little logo.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of
Great
hard work that's
pictures.
put into GLANSIS by a lot of folks, led by this woman named Rochelle Sturdivant. I should give her a big shout out because a lot of work went into this database. So there's a picture of it. So it will tell you so the Latin name, the common name, some synonyms, which dojo, weather loach, Japanese weatherfish, Amur weatherfish, all kinds of names.
Can I pause right there? I want to make a quick point here because I recently had an argument about whether dojo loaches could make it in Michigan.
Okay.
Amur is Russia, guys. Like,
right.
if it can survive there, it can survive here.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you look at so when I've done a lot of these sort of risk assessments, and so on GLANSIS you have obviously you have the impact, but the other two components that you do a separate assessment for is introduction. So like, could it get here? Because if it can't get here, well, then we don't need to worry about it, at least for now. And then the establishment assessment, could it survive? And so you look at where is it native to? Where has it established? And there's certain, ranges. Russia, Northern Europe, Japan, often, although that's a little bit more temperate. There's this really cool, sort of ecosystem map that has got 3 different letters. And it was actually a little bit depressing when I was doing it because I was looking at the classifications. And so we're polar, like the primary designation of like our climate. So it's a climate map.
Oh, okay.
I said ecosystem, but climate is more accurate. It's looking at the weather and the temperatures. And I'm looking around the map. I'm like, there is like no other polar where people live. We are like the only like couple of states that have like really made a bunch of cities
Who've
where
actually
it's so
managed to live
cold.
there.
I'm like, I don't know about like even you get a lot of jet stream coming over Northern Europe. Japan is not polar. So anyways, you look at places where it lives and okay, can it establish here? Because if it can't, then okay, we can import it and no big deal. So yeah, this guy is Eastern Asia from Siberia south to northern Vietnam, including Japan. So it's
To
got a
Siberia?
pretty wide range.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there are some
Amazing.
species, I can't remember the name that I was looking at. It's like, it can be frozen in ice, like in solid ice over winter, and then it will thaw and be alive.
Wood frogs, I think, can do that.
Yeah, I think probably there's other. I mean, it's.
Yeah,
I
wood
mean,
frogs
animals are
and
insane.
There's a species or two of stickleback
Okay,
that can be frozen in ice and do that.
right. Yeah. So, this GLANSIS, the fact sheet they've got where. So it's Great Lakes wide. They talk about populations all over the country, but they focus on Great Lakes populations.
Are there other places that you know of where dojo loaches have gotten established?
So you got Alabama, California, Florida, Hawaii, Idaho, Louisiana, Maryland. So Michigan, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, Oregon, Tennessee, Washington. And obviously they try to update these as much as possible. But there might be even more populations outside of the U.S. The species is established in Australia, Germany, Philippines, Spain, Turkmenistan.
Wow.
So, and then they go on to sort of try like the means of introduction. That's your pathway. And sometimes the detail is quite interesting. So in Michigan, populations are believed, or in the Upper Shiawassee, populations are believed to have descended from individuals imported from Kobe, Japan, which escaped from a nearby aquarium supply company in Oakland County before 1951, possibly as early as 1939.
Wow.
So it's been here for a while. And they go on to say most other states' populations were presumably the result of aquarium releases. So there you go.
So we did that.
Yeah.
We did that
Boom.
one. Yes.
And
We
I
did
will
that.
Yes.
say I know of at least one person who has dojo loaches in their tank, and I know of at least one aquarium store that has sold them within the last year.
Yeah.
I'm not going to name any names, and really,
Right.
I think that the individuals that were involved in selling them and keeping them had absolutely no idea that they were prohibited.
Right.
I genuinely believe that.
Yep.
Yep.
Agreed.
There's this weird myth going on in the hobby in Michigan that if it's descended from a individual, like people think they were like grandfathered in.
Right.
Yeah.
Like before.
Yeah.
Once you have it, it's okay as long as you didn't buy it illegally.
Yeah.
Once you have it, it's okay.
Right.
No.
Not true.
Not true. Won't.
Once you have that cocaine, I mean, once it's yours,
Yeah,
it's yours.
Thank you for that, by the way.
And if it's in your system, it's not illegal anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So interestingly, so Michigan, they talk about, they also have the regulations. So Michigan is a big, long number name for this rule. A violation involving a prohibited species is a felony, and a knowing introduction violation with intent to harm is punishable with up to 5 years in prison and a $2,000 to $1 million fine.
So wait,
I don't think you're going to go to prison for doing this, but
having
Prison and a $1 million fine.
being in possession of a weather loach is a felony.
well, this is what the regulations under the GLANSIS fact sheet says.
It is. I do know for a fact it is on the prohibited list, so that does not surprise me.
But
Yeah.
there's misdemeanors and
Felonies.
I know.
That's a-
The
Yeah.
prohibited list is much
pretty
harsher
hardcore.
than the
Yeah.
watch list.
Yeah. So
wow.
there you go.
Hey, guess what? Our lakes are precious.
Yeah.
I mean,
I mean,
having
I'm not
No, I
sad
know,
that
it's
a
just-
felony
it's
at all,
just
but
like-
it's definitely
it's intense.
I didn't know it was a felony.
yeah. So another, again, it's so hard to do proper management, but so each state has different species that they list. And then the way they define, okay, is it prohibited, regulated? There's all this terminology as far as how you go about, can you possess it? Can you transport it? It's confusing to know what's what, where. And a lot of the people that would sell these species, wholesalers, they don't know. Like they could, okay, well, I'm going to sell this to this person. They better know the rules. I don't know
Yeah, why
the
would the guy in
rules.
Florida that I buy fish from
Right.
know whether or
Yeah.
not I'm allowed to buy weather loaches?
Right.
When
Like-
I get lists.
They need to check every order back at their database for those individuals.
That would be the ideal. But to be fair, like we have problems keeping track of stuff in our own state. Is it fair to expect someone in Florida to keep track of every other state too, and every sale? You know what I mean? Like as a store,
Yeah.
I feel like that's on us to be like, we can't get
All right,
that.
so wait,
But
let
also,
me
we
throw
have
that
the
back at you.
technology.
If that's on us as a store, it should be on them as a wholesaler as well.
That's true, but
And then
it's
maybe
legal in
even
their
take
state
that
though.
One more step, that if they're selling something that can be invasive in Michigan, it could be a problem in, I think I could say this honestly, all 50 states.
Yeah.
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 Most
And
likely.
that's true, but also keep in mind that it's not regulated in that state though.
No, but that's the personal responsibility that the aquarium hobby needs to start taking.
And
Right,
that's
just
true.
'cause it's-
They can sell pacus to everyone, but there's not a single person I've ever met that could actually keep a pacu for their life. But you could go down to a big box store today. Actually, you could go down to a grocery store today and buy a pacu,
Right.
right?
the look
also
on
go
your
down
face was
So
priceless,
is there?
by the
No,
way.
I'm trying to figure out. So like, is there a? So this is like obviously harm to the environment, but is there like a? Okay, this is just not an ethical fish to keep because you just
The
can't keep it
pacu is
alive.
about ethics because they get about 3 feet in diameter.
Right. But
They're
is there
very
like a group that's like publishes lists of like, well, you shouldn't keep these in the aquariums.
There's no organized group that does that. There
Our
are people.
podcasts? That's about the best that we can do.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but it's interesting. So we talk about, like buying and selling. So another element that added to complexity is, internet commerce. So like when I do, so I'm doing these introduction assessments and looking, okay, well, so the first one is natural dispersal. Is it anywhere near the Great Lakes? Could it move naturally? Okay. Second one is that intentional release or escape. And that's, you're looking for, is this sold, as bait, as aquaria. And so I just Google weather loach for sale and see what pops up.
Right.
And oftentimes you have, Joe's trading post, and it's like an organized thing. But oftentimes it's like, you have eBay listings. You have all these crazy, they're not like a brick and mortar store.
Forum sites.
It's like, how do you even
Facebook.
try to police that? These sort of like undercurrent of selling all these animals. And so, even if you have every brick and mortar store doing their best work, you're going to have, things that you can get, or, like hobbyist sites where people post, oh, hey, I've got this and this. And I once met someone at a mall to like get was it grape caulerpa when I had my marine tank?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
But Caulerpa here's not a big deal.
Right. No, I mean, it's a marine.
Yeah, but if
Caulerpa
it was Kabamba and
Yeah.
you had
Right.
met those people on Facebook and
Yeah.
you went to the mall to get it, like where would regulation be in any of that?
Right.
Like,
Right.
just nowhere. It's just you have it and you can give it away.
I just had a very vivid image in my head of like a DEA agent being like, I have no idea what's happening here. I know it's not my jurisdiction, but why are you in a parking lot selling this?
Yeah. So I know about 2 years ago, there was proposed legislation for changing the aquatic species available in Michigan from a blacklist to a whitelist. That one was fought hard to say, no, that's not that. I get where you're going with that, but the practicality behind that, and I think that's kind of what you're alluding to, is the practicality behind regulating some of this stuff is impossible. So what was submitted to the legislation that was trying to put the whitelist together was 22,000 species.
Wow.
That's what's available to the aquarium hobby, 22,000 species.
Get your data entry intern on that.
Right.
It's like, do we really need all those?
Part of that happens, well, yes.
Yeah.
And part of that happens because, for example, one of our favorite groups of fish is the dwarf cichlids from South America
Okay.
in the genus Apistogramma. And in that genus, there's about 300 species
Right.
and counting, because every little bitty tributary of the Amazon River system has a different species of Apistogramma. In Lake Malawi in Africa, man, you probably have heard of Lake Malawi in Africa. It's like the evolutionist's dream, the taxonomist's dream to study Lake Malawi. There are over 850 different species of cichlids just in that lake.
Thanks, Nile perch.
What's that?
Said thanks, Nile perch.
Yeah.
Fortunately, Nile perch haven't completely devastated
Okay.
Lake Malawi. Lake Victoria
Right.
has been completely
Yeah.
destroyed
Yeah.
by a Nile perch invasive species, and part of why this conversation is important. But for perspective on Lake Malawi, there's about 750 different species of freshwater fish total in North America, including Central America, right? 850 in just that lake in Africa.
Wow.
All of them of interest to aquatic hobbyists. So the idea of trying to come up with a blacklist that's enforceable or a whitelist that's practical, neither one of those seem feasible
With the current funding.
with the current.
Right. I mean, Illinois does. They use a whitelist approach for some. I'm not going to say that it's for some pathways and not others, but they
Okay.
have done that. I mean, New Zealand, they use the whitelist approach for a lot of things. You can't even bring your dog into like Australia. It has to quarantine for 6 months. They don't have rabies in Australia. So it's like,
Do they really not?
they don't have rabies. Like there's all kinds of pests they don't have, and people they complain about it. And it's like, well, guess what? You don't have these things for a reason. So it's,
And an island has to be careful.
Yeah. I mean, they've already been burned big time. Actually, I've got a really cool, probably one of my favorite invasive species stories. It's terrestrial, but involves an island.
Okay.
Do you guys want to hear it?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
I did undergrad out in California. in Santa Barbara, and off the coast are the Channel Islands. I think there's 7 of them. Very old, very like dinosaur looking islands. And so on this set of islands is called the island fox. And it's tiny because lots of things on islands are very small. It's like the size of a cat. It's very, very cute. And many years ago, some dude on a ship like let loose some pigs, as is very common. And they, established, multiplied, dug up a lot of vegetation. Also on this island is the golden eagle, which is very big and it loves to eat small-ish mammals.
Golden eagles on a tiny, tiny island?
Well, I mean, they nest there and fly around.
I don't know how far out the Channel Islands actually are.
They can make it to the mainland.
They just go back and forth.
You can see the islands from.
I was going to say.
Yeah. I mean, and but they're not that many because, there's not a whole lot of food. And so, rabbits, piglets, the occasional fox, but not as much meat as a piglet. And so there's all these pigs. And so some, restoration ecologists are like, let's get rid of these pigs, restore the islands, right? So they do this big old, get rid of the pigs. And so now, say back in the day, there were like 5 eagles. They grew to 20 because there's all these pigs to eat. Now there are no pigs, but there are a lot of very hungry eagles. So what do you think they started to eat?
Foxes.
This very threatened, endemic Channel Island fox.
That doesn't exist anywhere
else. Almost wiped it out. And so, you have these good intentions and you don't eat the cascading effects. You sometimes can't predict.
What do you do when one protected species tries to take out another protected species?
Yeah. The one keeping tabs on is in the Pacific Northwest, endangered salmon, killer whales, and seals.
Yeah.
Right.
That relationship is so complex.
Yeah.
And it's like
can't get rid of the killer whales.
Well, right now they're actually seriously in Canada discussing culling seals.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because they have far outpaced the whales in keeping track with salmon numbers.
Wow.
And it's reached a point where mathematically they're like, the whales might not be able to compete with them.
We have it in the Great Lakes with shad, lake trout, and sea lampreys. That balance, and now king salmon and oyster gobies and zebra mussels, all of those species all mess with each other and mess with our populations.
Right.
And half of them were introduced to try to fix the other half.
Yeah.
Wait,
You send the
species
dog
interact
to get
with
the
each
cat
other?
to get to the spider to
What's
get to the
that?
fly.
I said, wait, species interact with each other?
So interesting. You talk about like Malawi and the diversity of the dwarf cichlids.
Yeah.
Did you know that the Great Lakes has their own like hyper diverse taxa or group?
It would make sense. Just about any isolated ecosystem does. But what's the
right? I mean, the Great Lakes are actually fairly, and this, I think I've read this from like depauperate of diversity.
I know
they don't
very
have
little
for
about
how
the Great
big
Lakes.
they
They're
are.
cold, so it's
There's not a lot of living there. A lot of it has been introduced, but unionid mussels.
Yeah.
Unionid mussels are the most. It's like the most diverse freshwater mussel group like, in the world. There's like, well, at least there were before the zebra mussel. I think took rid of a bunch. I think there's in like the 20 or 23 species of this freshwater mussel, and so like they're like those big brown ones that you maybe used to find as kids in inland lakes. So there's all kinds of those, and they're slowly being wiped out, mostly from invasive species and pollution and stuff. But it's like this. It's not a charismatic megafauna, as we like to say. So like no one cares about the mussels, but they're cool, and it's kind of nice to know that the Great Lakes has their own little,
like the panda bears are actually pretty okay now. Let's look at something else for a little bit.
Well, recently we talked about licorice gouramis, which are a very small anabantoid from Borneo.
Related to like the bettas.
Yep.
Okay.
Bettas and gouramis.
Just a regular betta fish.
Yep.
Okay.
But
tiny.
Right.
And nobody cares about them other than aquarists. But orangutans live in the same habitat, right? So if you protect orangutan habitat, you protect licorice gourami habitat.
Like the owl back in the forests of Pacific Northwest.
Exactly. So you need
what's the cutie pie of the Great Lakes?
Right, you need the charismatic megafauna, which is a great word.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It
We need
is.
to use that word more often. Charismatic
If we can say it, we'll use it.
Yeah.
We'll use it. Yeah.
I want to get back to the mussel thing. I can actually answer this. Mussels are actually really prone to specializing because they can specialize to filtering out different things at different depths.
Wow.
A lot. I think it was Alfred Russel Wallace. He actually documented like in tide zones how different types of barnacles are more competitive than others just based on how capable they are at tolerating salinity changes because of the tide pool.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, I guess
amazing.
there are,
the differentiation of.
There are species of mussels that live in brine pools or on the edges of brine pools, so I guess I shouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So you've talked about some pretty specific examples like the dojo loach.
Okay.
Can you like buzz through what are some of the other things that we as aquarists have screwed up? What have we gotten established?
Yeah,
Or-
what's on your list here? Because we did start to talk about going through that like watch list, and I don't think we ever did.
Yeah.
Right. So, so here's the interesting. Like I said, you know, the darling of the invasive species world. And here I use invasive. Notice that, like this, you know,
It's
loaded
ingrained.
word.
Buzzword.
Keep them loaded.
It has been ballast water. And
Yeah.
so the trades, the organisms in trade, aquariums, like they've, we're still kind of learning about them and what is in them. I mean, there've been a lot. So this list isn't exhaustive. I emailed Rochelle because I was checking, and the way the search engine works, there's a couple of things that it just doesn't pull up a lot of these. But so yeah, you got that red swamp crayfish, which was apparently marketed as a freshwater lobster for aquariums.
Oh, I remember seeing
Sounds
those now.
about right.
It's very red.
Oh yeah.
Have you guys ever heard of blue spotted sunfish?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was 1971. I mean, so yeah, you've got the European frogbit, obviously, European water clover. That was what the Marsilia quadrifolia,
Yeah.
right? You talked
Yeah.
about.
What about Cherex Destructor?
Oh, yeah,
That's such a good
So
name.
that's
such a good name.
That is so these are all established. That is that's a surveillance species. That's not here yet.
Okay, that's a blue crayfish.
Yeah. And I
Right.
think, is that the one that's from Australia? There's one of the Cheraxes, I think, is Australian, I want to say.
Sure. Do you know?
I don't.
I mean, the interesting thing is some of these species, they're like threatened or endangered in
Yeah.
their. So, what's the one? It's not actually a plant, but it looks like it. Starry stonewort, Nidolopsis obtusa. I don't believe it would have been an
I don't
aquarium.
know that one.
It looks almost like a long filamentous sort of thing, and
Okay.
it lives in inland lakes. And I'm pretty sure that it's like threatened in Europe. It's like in its native range. So then it's like, well, doubly, what do you do? Okay, it's
Yeah,
like,
like-
we want to get rid of it here, and then it dies there, and then it's like totally extinct. But I mean, hopefully they can solve their own problems without having to have it established
Yeah.
here. But
Yeah, like here, you take it.
We know of
Yeah.
at least 2 extremely established aquarium fish that are extinct in the wild. Like fish that are like
right, what are those?
Fish that you could buy at the grocery store.
When he
Wow.
says established, he doesn't mean established here. He means
No,
that they're
yeah.
prevalent in the trade.
Yeah.
Just want to be clear on
no,
terminology.
No,
here.
I was like, what? And then I figured it
the
out.
white
Yeah.
cloud mountain minnow, white clouds. Is
Okay.
what everybody calls them, and that's like some places sell white clouds as feeder fish. They're like
Wow.
They're-
super common. And then red tail shark, which is not technically a shark. It's in the barb family.
Okay.
But those 2 species are extinct in the wild.
Okay.
And then there's
Axolotls are
axolotls are extinct in the wild.
They are very, very threatened in their
Okay.
native range. They have some. I think they have been released in other populations, but
Yes.
they're very readily bred in. the
They're
hobby.
an amphibian in the Americas, and there's that crazy fungus wiping them out.
Yeah.
Right. yeah. So
Another one though. Do you know it's either called a mandarin fish or a Chinese perch? Sinoperca chatsui.
No.
So that's a watch list or a sort of surveillance one. It loves to eat fish fry, so that one's not here yet. But it was I think I probably found it. A lot of these that I found, because obviously you guys don't have your full stock online. So when I search
Right.
for it, it's like a random.
So Sinoperca, and that was in the aquarium trade?
Pretty sure, yeah.
Somebody Google that.
It's a very beautiful looking fish. I think I'm imagining it's pretty big. The picture looked quite large. I mean, obviously it was a Chinese perch. Probably.
Is it
pretty big.
a CYN?
SINIPERCA.
No, I don't know this fish at all.
I have no idea what that is.
Interesting.
It is quite pretty though.
It is very.
You should see if you can buy it
Yeah.
next time you got to order
Frankly,
something.
I have had somebody attempt to trade in European frogbit this year as well. Like somebody who was growing it who didn't know what assuming
Really?
it was Amazon frogbit, which are like
Yeah.
we have Amazon frogbit,
Yeah, Ben was saying.
but it's so close. They're so similar that the people just didn't know.
Right.
Wow. Another one, Chinese pond mussel, Anodonta woodiana. That was recently, I believe, Cynodonta woodiana, speaking of changing your names. So I found it for sale online. It's an IUCN, so the International Union for Conservation of Nature. They published this list, 100 worst invasive species. So like you got the bullfrog, and this is global. So like bullfrog, all those big ones that we have sent other places.
I don't think.
I don't have the list memorized.
Okay. I don't think they are.
Okay.
I would doubt it because there are some real bad ones. And I mean, snakehead's bad, but it's not,
Right.
Snakeheads are spooky.
So our squirrels are on there.
Squirrels are.
They're like hyper aggressive compared to like native Italian or European squirrels. And I'm pretty sure they're on there.
Right.
There's a bunch. I mean,
Like how massively fat those are than other squirrels.
you know what are mean are those pine squirrels, the little ones.
I love those guys.
are-
Chatterboxes. Yep. I love those guys. Robin calls them the naughty ones.
They're the naughty ones. They're the very naughty ones.
Sassy.
Yeah. But no, so the Chinese pond mussel, so again, impacts potentially to native and endangered unionid mussels that I just mentioned.
Oh, yeah?
They're like competition for food. A lot of the invasive species, the reason they're so successful is they reproduce and grow just so quickly. They're very competitive.
Mm-hmm.
That's not here yet, but that is a potential one that could come. So the paper that it has been accepted. It's in press. It will be out any day now. That talks about all of these species and how we started out with 448. That included everything, including like mammals and reptiles. And we narrowed it down. We just did fish, plants, and invertebrates. And we ended up with 144. So 69 of those could be introduced through intentional release, and 35 of those escape from recreational culture as a pathway.
Wow.
So a lot of them have multiple pathways. For example, it could be, in a shipping, like if it exists somewhere where ballast water is taken up, it could arrive via there. And if it's also sold online, it could be there. So just because it's one, it can also be in others. So we came down with 144. 64 of those were plants. There's 4 algae, 40 fish, 5 mollusks, 28 crustaceans, 1 platyhelminthes, and 2 bryozoans. So all of those could arrive, establish, and I think we filtered for have some sort of impact, like a low, moderate, higher impact.
Well, by the way, congratulations, because that sounds like a ton of work.
I mean, it was, my eyes were going cross there by the end,
When is
What a
this gonna be
valuable
published?
resource, though.
it should be, so it's just in press. It should, I can let you guys know when it's, so that's on that management of biological invasion. So obviously anyone could go have a read, see what's on there's all the tables. That's got all of them in there. So that would be a good thing to look if you want to cross-reference.
I was like, that's
what
something
you have
that ends up in our window. Like, do you have this at home?
Yeah. So
Have you seen this fish?
right.
Well, I
Wanted.
think one of the things we're definitely going to do is see what we can do to help, and see what we can do to look at that list and see what's on that list that we have, what's on that list that we can easily get. And
This sounds like a YouTube series that because every time you see me writing, I'm making notes because I'm like, this sounds like a video.
Yeah.
Well, you guys could even do this, be kind of educational, informative. So for those species that aren't regulated, that you guys wouldn't be in trouble for, you could even have like a tank, like full. Ooh. They're not for sale, but like, hey, these are some species that could have some like really bad. And then people like, you could have a little info on.
But I want that. Well, here's the alternative.
Right, or this is why you shouldn't own it. And,
I love that.
I don't know.
That's kind of a fun idea.
Yeah.
See where that goes.
that's the steps that we need to take as hobbyists. This is kind of the push that we keep having with some of these podcasts, with some of these YouTube videos that we do, where we're going to bring this information out there, and we're going to take whatever kind of crap you guys want to give us to say we're wrong or we're right or we shouldn't be doing this, or hey, cheer us on. But what we do has an impact. What we do makes a difference in the environment. What we do makes a difference with the individual fish. And we can cause some pretty significant damage.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the potential to do a lot of good, though, on the other side.
Right.
Yeah.
If we're intelligent and make good decisions.
We're full of people that do this because we absolutely love aquatic ecosystems so much that we're willing to spend a ridiculous amount of money to try to recreate one in this little teeny glass box. Why would we want to contribute to destroying aquatic ecosystems?
I've got nothing for you.
I'm speechless. No, I mean, I think it's, people, they want what they want and they don't want to trade off for the greater good. And this is just another example. I mean, we're seeing it right now with, limiting your own actions for the greater good. And
what?
Hold yourselves accountable and hold everyone around you, above you in the supply chain, accountable as well.
I like the little
No, I mean, it's, there's lots of parallels. Like Australia, like there is no real pandemic, and they have a lot of invasive species, but like their biosecurity, which is what they call so our biosecurity system in America is a lot of well-meaning individuals, but just not much money. In Australia and New Zealand, it's like a major employer. It's like it's a federal department that they do a lot. And Australians, and Kiwis, I feel like they're very, community minded, and they understand the limitations to their freedoms, that's in quotes, are for a good reason. And so I think the Aquaria is like this microcosm of what you can do. Ask not what you can do for yourself, but
so you
what
just
you can do
hit
for your country.
a chord of a few questions I want to direct at you.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was a big cultural shock for you? You got your degree in Australia, and then you come back here, and you're like you had to have had a moment where you're like, this is very different.
Coming back here or going to Australia?
Either or.
Both.
Yeah, I mean...
specifically working with your work.
Right. I mean, it's just interesting, had I stayed in Australia, my employment possibilities were diverse and much greater. I could have, here, you get a PhD and it's like, okay, well, you're like a professor. There's a couple of jobs in invasive species that you can maybe get. Whereas in Australia, you have each state has their own biosecurity department. You have it at the federal level. So that was, it's like a thing. Like people, you go to the airport and there's searches and there's lots of signs, and it's just a huge part of their culture. So, that's kind of from a professional standpoint. Coming back here, it's a tough question. Maybe ask me another one. I'll think about it.
Okay.
Well, I can give some context, just the way that things are here. We have multiple employees with degrees in biology, specializing in fisheries that work here. Several.
Right.
Those are
my
jobs that are available to people with bachelor's degrees in fisheries.
I was like, one of my favorite things was we have a new person who apparently worked at an office who her supervisor was someone a former employee trained.
Wow.
Yeah. Out in Washington.
Yeah, it's a small pool.
Right.
Wow. Yeah, no, I think it was really interesting when I first moved there. One of my fellow students was like, so if you're in America and you break your arm and you don't have insurance,
you just die.
What happens? And, so that was probably the biggest shock for the Australians.
With your parents for 2 years.
Yeah. Also, alcohol is very expensive there. Heavily taxed.
Pluses and minuses.
Heavily taxed. Yes. So,
I'm picturing like college parties speaking like, guys, slow down. Like,
Yeah. Well, and like the minimum wage there is like $15 or I think more even. Like a bartender would earn like 20 to 22 base at least. So because I tried like tipping and people were like, oh, thank you. That's very kind, but unnecessary. So, and then, I moved back here and I moved to Detroit. I was at Wayne State. So that was a shock moving from Tasmania, the most beautiful place on earth, to
And
Detroit.
Wayne State's lovely campus.
Which is not. I mean, Wayne State's actually, I don't want to knock them too much. They're really, I think they've come a long way to serving their local population. I was like in East Detroit. So like it was interesting. I was like half a mile from Ghost Point and half a mile from like burned out shells of houses. Like it was, the difference in like the two spots I think was the most struck. We would take Australians on these tours and they just couldn't believe it when they came to visit us. It was at the point where Detroit was like really in the news as far as its revitalization. People globally knew about Detroit. So, that was probably.
All right. Well, getting more to the hobby itself, what is something that you wish hobbyists would stop doing, and what's something you wish they would all start doing?
Okay. So again, my background is, I don't have a total huge knowledge of hobbyists.
No, that's okay.
I think what it comes down to is impact.
Right.
And how do we change or affect our impact?
Yeah. I mean, I think hobbyists, here's the thing is like, they're parents with kids. They are people who they don't know any better, and they don't know to know any better. They don't know if they should know. I think a lot of people that come in here, it's like, they're trying to pay their bills. They're trying to get their kids from school. They're busy people, especially right now, are like having a hard time, even just coping and like learning about the impact of their fish. It's just, it's not possible, like there are limitations to what you can do. And so I think it's, I think that sort of stopgap point needs to be more of the retail, the stores, to, you guys, that's your job is to purchase fish, and you might have just that extra little bit of time to look into what you're getting.
So the hobbyists that do know better, you would probably argue should bug their retailers more.
Yeah. Well, and to say, look, man, I support you guys getting rid of this species or that species. And I would love for you to, check this out, be more responsible. I mean, obviously, you shouldn't own a lot of these, but the way they get into the waters is being released. So just don't release them.
That's kind of a really good point, right? Like if nobody would ever release a dojo loach into the wild, it wouldn't matter if we kept them.
Right.
But we all know some idiot's gonna.
Yeah. So just don't ever release them. That would be the biggest person. It's like from an individual point who doesn't have the time to research, the background. Just don't let anything go.
We harp on this point, I think, on a regular basis, is where does the responsibility lie? And we as a store have taken that to heart and said a lot of it lies on us, and we're willing to accept that responsibility. We can't do it all. I get lists every single week from wholesalers that have all kinds of things on it that can potentially be an invasive threat, that get way too big to ever be in anyone's home aquarium. Sometimes, actually, I just received a list that had wild-caught Bengal cardinals on it, which I didn't even think those were allowed to be imported in the United States anymore. They shouldn't be. They don't need to be. No one should ever buy a wild-caught Bengal cardinal fish.
They're highly endangered and very limited range in the wild, in case you don't know.
Widely available captive bred.
Widely available and way higher.
Yeah, easier to get captive bred.
Whose job is it? Who's going to do this? I mean, we're going to keep trying. We're going to keep educating.
But we're just one store.
Am I supposed to go to every single one of my wholesalers? And the answer I know is probably yes. No, I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. All of them and say, okay, you have this on your list. Therefore, I'm not going to buy fish from you until you don't offer those fish anymore. There won't be any left.
Right. I mean, it's tip like those wholesalers, they're probably selling all over the country. And for some regions, it's not an issue. Like a tropical fish here, no big deal. You can sell it because it won't survive. But they shouldn't sell that thing to Florida.
Right.
Because it would survive. And, and there's no easy way for them to separate that out. It's a tough issue. So I feel like, maybe if there was a central state, like a statewide clearing,
sort of
like a
body.
filter that things went through. But I mean, they get a lot of pressure from, the industry, and there's just, they're overworked. I mean, there's not many people doing invasive species stuff in Michigan, and they're like putting out fires, from these immediate threats. And it's like, I'm sure they would love to do it, but it's just a time.
Well, I think that's
issue.
one of the things that happened with the blacklist and the whitelist thing was the aquarium hobby. It was introduced in a strange way, the potential whitelist, and it was introduced in an uneducated way, in a way that said, here's what we're proposing is okay. And there are all kinds of things that on that list that, for not because of invasive species reasons, but other reasons, don't belong in the hobby.
Right.
And the aquarium industry came back with this giant list of, sure, you want to regulate this? Here's the list of 22,000 species that the aquarium hobby currently has available.
Let us know.
Let us know how you expect an officer in the field to enforce that.
Yeah. I mean, this is almost, this is what PhDs are for, to look at these questions. I feel like, you gotta raise up a student that has, that's their job, is to think really hard about one question.
So I have a proposed solution, or at least a path to one.
I like it.
Advocate for more money in the sciences.
What?
That's the place to start. We need to be able to pay people to look at this stuff with a fine-tooth comb.
Or go to Lansing and say there needs to be a bigger budget for invasive species stuff.
Like that's something that should be important to people. Is
everyone start writing your congressman.
Yeah.
So wait, what if we back this up even one step further? Aquarists would not have to have this conversation if everybody knew, don't let it go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't put it don't put it back in the water.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the water gardens, you'd have to take some extra precautions, but that would be,
but there's so many fewer species that's really a big issue with.
Right.
Although, okay, let's talk about water gardens for a minute. Because when it comes to plants, plants reproduce in much different ways than fish do. So if I have koi in my water garden, if I don't physically pick those koi up and put them into Reed's Lake, they'll never get there, right? But if I have water hyacinth and those water hyacinth produce seeds, and ducks land in my pond and brush up against those seeds, and they happen to stick to the wet feathers on that duck, and then it goes and flies to Reed's Lake, that could potentially introduce.
Right.
So where's the what's okay to keep in our water gardens? And maybe that's a much bigger question with gardening in general. Why aren't hostas taking over the forests of Michigan?
She's like, I'm not a botanist.
So many questions.
Right. No, and I recognize maybe that's a rhetorical question.
Right.
But how do we push those here we go. How do we find ways to get those kinds of questions answered so that instead of wondering, we just let people know that if you do this, this will happen. If you don't do this, it's not going to happen.
And
Right.
another hurdle is once you have that information, how do you distribute it? Like this, I keep wanting to say Ripple because that's the organization I'm familiar with.
Oh, GLANSIS?
GLANSIS, thank
Yeah.
you. Like, how do you disperse that information out? Like, even once you have it, like that's not easy to get in the hands of like a hobbyist. You know what I mean?
Right. And it's more geared towards researchers, natural resource managers. Like it's not very, it's public can interpret it pretty easily, but you have to have a little bit of a background in science. Yeah. I mean that, so do you guys know Sea Grant?
I do.
So Sea Grant, I think they're the ones, so that Habitattitude is I think the correct way to say it. They help with that. They do a lot of work. They're kind of that science public nexus. They try to translate that science into, English public, lay knowledge. And so they've got a bunch of projects that try to do that. So they're a good resource. Is checking out, like each state has it's usually a Sea Grant office that invasive species is one of their areas. Sea Grant is actually a branch under NOAA randomly, but it's Sea Grant, it's a national endeavor. And sometimes they partner with universities, sometimes they're sort of independent. But they do a lot of really good work, a lot of very passionate, knowledgeable people. So
approaching alphabet soup territory. So if you
like,
can write some of these down, I'll put them in the description as well.
I was
okay.
I'm only going to mention it because it's funny. I only know Sea Grant because when I was working on the proposal for my undergrad research project, I kept bugging one of the guys who was on the IUCN committee. And I remember one day I kept walking in and he's like, I'm working on this Sea Grant thing. Will you just figure it out on your own?
There you go.
Or go bug Lombardo or something.
Right. Yeah.
And I was like, and then I was like, wait, what's that? Sounds way more interesting than what I'm doing.
They do marine debris, invasive species. I worked between my undergrad and PhD, I worked out in California for Sea Grant, doing like a ballast water project, working with like commercial shipping companies and, getting best management practices and technologies on there. So I got to go on some really big ships. It was pretty cool.
That would be.
It was very, very, it's amazing. The maritime industry is incredible. So
I love big boats and ships.
yeah, it's impressive.
That's really cool stuff.
Yeah.
And they were, during the economic recession, a lot of them were just like parked because there wasn't as much stuff going around.
Yeah.
So what happens when they park? Stuff starts growing on the outside. And then guess what happens when you start using them again? All of that stuff goes all around the world. There's algae and mussels. Drop a little bit here. So it's like this became this invasive species issue, but it's like an economic issue. It's called this ghost fleet. And this article got published by these two guys who were actually flying over it on their way to an invasive species conference. And I knew them, and they're like, "What's going to happen?" And so they just wrote this article, and on what's going to happen when they start firing up these old ships and moving them around with all this.
I love the
fouling.
idea of like two scientists being like, "Can we scrape your hulls real quick? Like, I need some samples."
Oh yeah,
Everything's connected to everything else.
yeah. So. Anything else?
Well, I know I said we weren't going to whine, but what do I have to do to get other Chana species deregulated?
So I can actually answer that it's probably not going to happen because in order for that to happen, we need the funding for officers to be able to have the training to distinguish that along with like 800 other species.
Yeah, Chanidae is like, so of all like the regulations, every now and then you get like whole families. Mm-hmm. And Chanidae is one of those.
We just had our Dream Freshwater Fish podcast, and one of those Chana species was on mine. It's a tropical fish.
Right.
So,
yeah.
There's no chance of ever surviving.
It's interesting. Sometimes what makes it on the list and what doesn't. And
I totally respect the necessity to do that. Again,
because how would you enforce it?
Yeah. Right. Vote so that there's funding for there to be guys who look at Chana species so that I can get the one that I want.
Right. Yeah.
There's a betta species called the scientific name is Betta chanoides.
Right.
Because it's betta looks like a snakehead.
Yeah.
Essentially. Uh-huh. Right? And that one sometimes has a hard time getting in.
Yeah.
Even though it's a 2-inch fish.
Right.
What's the Parachanidae? Is there like another one? Parachanas? I think that
I don't know.
there's another variation of
If
that
there
that's
is, I'm
also
interested in
sometimes.
that.
The
I
Parachannas
feel like-
probably make it in much less than Betta-chinoides does.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
No,
and
because
then-
I think parachanas are right, like they're actually included
are
often
they?
with the
That-
chanidaes.
That
Yeah.
would make sense. Yeah, they're not
So-
coming in.
No.
What's in the
No.
bag,
That's
sir?
all right. I've already mourned that. I'll take the fish. There's plenty that I know that I love that I can get.
So what's the takeaway, Alicia? What's the
What's the moral of the story?
The moral of the story. So here I am talking about fish and scientific names and thinking about, what do you do? What is the answer? And I think it might be in our kids. Dr. Seuss has a book, What Pet Should I Get? And, teaching them when they're young, like I was coming here and my 2 kids, Ginny and Evie, what are you going to go do? Are you going to talk sciencey stuff? And, getting them interested in science and talking about this kind of thing when little kids come in the store or when they're at home.
That's something I think people don't appreciate, because my experience with children is that they're very almost innately interested in science, and then for some reason we decide not to nurture that and we just let it die.
And they can grasp way more than you think
Yeah,
they can.
Oh, yeah.
I've had some pretty at-length discussions with some children about specific aquarium topics that I'm like, I'm barely keeping up. Like,
Right.
They
And then
still
they
know how to ask good questions.
yeah,
and then they, lecture their parents. Like I get lectured all the time. And so maybe, that's not the full answer, but that's a partial answer, something that we haven't touched on tonight.
Well, that does have a long impact. I mean,
Right.
that they are the. Someday we have to pass the torch to them.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people and they get fish probably, to have a family tank and the kids are into it. And so,
Those are some of our favorite. We get a kid that's excited, and a kid that's not just excited but wants to learn about it. Not just I want that one, and that one.
Yeah.
Which that was me, by the way. I want that one. And that one. But starts to get into what's going on and why. I love it.
I
I was
can't-
on Seriously Fish, or I was on this, and I saw that, and can I do that? And do you think that would work? But are you sure?
Yeah.
Like,
And every parent for that child at some point while I'm talking to that child is going to tell me, I'm sorry he is asking so many questions. And the genuine response is from the bottom of my heart, this is going to be the best part of my day.
right.
Just however long this takes, that's however long it's going to take.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the amount of time I want to spend on it.
Yeah. No, so I would definitely, whenever this comes out, I will probably not Evie because she's only 3, but Virginia is 5.5, and I will probably I will play this for her, and she will absorb much of it and have a lot of
love to hear that
questions.
response.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I'll let you know what she says, and
you'll have to
If
give
she-
us her review.
if she's got any burning questions or ideas for the next.
She's like,
I'd love to hear her ideas.
2 stars, mildly amusing.
She falls asleep at minute 15, and then we'll.
Right. Yeah.
So that's what it comes down to, right? It's knowledge and education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we say that we've got to, it starts with our kids. I agree with that it's got to go with the kids. But that's letting a lot of adults take a pass that I'm not willing to give
Right.
them.
That's what I'm saying. It's a partial answer.
Yeah.
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 Well, if it starts with your kids, it starts with the person who's teaching the kids,
Yeah.
which is the parent.
We've spent a lot of time talking about what science means, and science equals knowledge. Knowledge equals science. Anybody who says science isn't the answer needs more knowledge so that they can understand that science is the answer, and knowledge is the answer, and knowing is what we're talking about here. And knowing how to do this better, and knowing how to do this right, and knowing what impact we're going to have is what it's about. What impact we're going to have on kids. What future we're going to leave for them. I had a discussion, a very offhanded discussion today with somebody who was reading a book on the effects of climate change and how we knew all this crap 50 years ago and still didn't do anything about it. And I remember relating that, the last time I read something like that, I thought about buying an SUV and a bunch of disposable plastic. Because what's the point? And of course, I ate my lunch out of a reusable container. And yes, I have a minivan that I drive around, but that's because I haul fish stuff in it. I need that for my job, and there's a reason for it. And we do what we can to make the impact. We're going to continue to do that. But those times when it seems hopeless, there's times where Alisha is looking at the 22,000 species. We're saying we're going to keep anyway, going, how do we regulate that? And those times where we think, okay, if I just throw that plastic fork away, it's just one fork. What's the point? All of it matters. All of it's going to make a difference. All of it's stuff that we can do better, and we have to. If for nothing else, then for Ginny and Evie, thank you.
That sometimes there's a point where you just got to dig in your own heels and tell the rest of the world, no, you move.
Right. Well, and also, you like, do we really need 22,000 species? Like, are you acting like a 3-year-old and insisting you have to have all these toys? Like, surely you could just have like 1,000 toys and not 22,000 toys.
These are honest questions we need to be able to answer, though.
Yeah.
But it's a reflection on the practicality of it. And so even if you don't look at the 22,000 species and you look at 2,200 species,
right?
And a DNR officer walking into a pet store that has to discern 2,200 species or 220 species.
That's a lot.
It's not the solution.
Yeah. And those final 1,000 very like small specific species are the ones that I think we are the finest interested in making sure that they stay around by keeping them in aquariums. So it's really hard for us to say, yeah, we'll give that up, because we're worried that if we don't have that one specific species of apisto out of the Amazon, it's going to be gone just like the zebra pleco is now.
Yeah.
That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not an easy argument to have.
This is related.
You know what is an easy one? An easy solution to, okay, aquarists, let's make it really simple. Don't let them go. Done. Conversation over.
Yep.
Yeah.
I agree
We
with
would
that.
never have to sit here, and it's so simple. Don't put your fish in the ocean. Don't put your fish back in the lake. Wear your freaking mask.
Listen to the people who know things.
Right.
Don't put anything that's ever been in your tank into a waterway. Like, that's a great way to get fish diseases out into our waterways. Like, don't do that.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
Euthanasia is a better, more humane option.
Right.
Yeah. Like one goldfish versus the entire Great Lakes.
Come on. Come on.
It's like,
Oh, that. No, okay, that makes sense. It's really that simple.
Yeah. Best case scenario, it freezes to death. Worst case scenario, it ruins everything.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
It's just a tiny orange Asian carp. Like, that's literally what it is. Like, what are you doing?
Don't do it.
Right. Fortunately, they're the same color as fishing lures. So,
Yeah.
Anyway. Okay, so we can keep harping on this. We could talk about this for another 2 hours
Probably.
if we want to keep going.
It's like car talk, though. Here you have gone and wasted another hour of your life that you'll never get back.
All right.
all of this is so that we can get back to that fun stuff and keep having lots of fun, and let's keep those hands wet. Thanks for listening.